Lenox Avenue. 6:22 inches the morning. A black Cadillac sits abandoned in the middle of the street, engine still purring like a heartbeat that refuses to stop. The driver's door hangs wide open. A leather purse rests untouched on the passenger seat. But it's the blood smeared across the chrome door handle that makes your stomach drop. And then you see it, a white cloth tied to the rearview mirror, swaying gently in the early breeze. 3 bold letters stitched across the fabric. KK. This wasn't a robbery. This was a message. Drag marks streak across the pavement, leading toward the curb before vanishing into nothing. Whoever was behind that wheel didn't leave willingly, and whoever took her wanted the whole neighborhood to know exactly who was responsible. But here's what they didn't know. The woman they snatched wasn't just anyone. She belonged to someone who didn't forgive, someone who didn't forget. They thought they could take her and walk away. They were wrong. Before we dive deeper into what happened next, do me a favor. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button right now. We cover real stories like this, the kind that'll keep you thinking long after the video ends. Stories that don't get told enough. Stories that matter. And while you're at it, drop a comment below. I want to know, where are you watching from right now? What city, what state, what country, and what time is it there? Are you watching this at midnight with the lights off, or are you on your lunch break trying to get through the day? Let me know. I read every single comment. All right, now, let's get back to it. Because the woman they took? She wasn't just some random target. She wasn't chosen by accident. Her name carried weight in Harlem. Her presence meant something. And the man she was married to? He was the kind of person you didn't cross unless you had a death wish or were too ignorant to know better. The Klan thought they were sending a message of fear. What they actually did was light a fuse. And once that fuse was lit, there was no putting it out. So buckle up, because what comes next is a story of power, miscalculation, and a reckoning that shook Harlem to its core. Harlem in 1947 wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a world unto itself. A place where jazz spilled out of basement clubs at 3 in the morning, where the smell of fried chicken and collard greens drifted through tenement windows, where Sunday mornings meant church bells and sharp suits and hats, tilted just right. The war was over. Men had come home, some whole, some broken, all of them changed. They'd fought for a country that still didn't see them as equals, and now they were back, trying to carve out a life in a city that promised everything and delivered just enough to keep you hungry. But Harlem had something the rest of the country didn't. Pride. It had culture. It had music. It had voices that refused to be silenced. Langston Hughes walked these streets. Duke Ellington played these rooms. This was the heartbeat of Black America, and everyone knew it. Still, beneath all that beauty, there was tension. The kind you couldn't see, but could always feel, like humidity before a storm. White resentment simmered just beyond the borders of the neighborhood. There were people who hated what Harlem represented, hated the success, the confidence, the refusal to bow down. They saw black excellence as a threat, and threats, in their minds, had to be dealt with. Most of the time, that hatred stayed quiet. It lived in whispered slurs, in redlining policies, in jobs that suddenly weren't available once you showed up in person. But every now and then, it boiled over. And when it did, it got ugly. Harlem had learned to protect itself. It had its own systems, its own hierarchies, its own codes. The police, they didn't come around much, unless they were looking to shake someone down or make an example. So the community policed itself. And at the top of that structure was a man who understood one simple truth. Respect wasn't given, it was earned. And once earned, it was maintained through discipline, strategy, and the occasional reminder that certain lines should never be crossed. People called him a lot of things. Some called him a businessman. Others called him a gangster. A few whispered the word king when they thought no one was listening. But whatever label you used, the reality was the same. He ran Harlem, not through chaos or reckless violence, but through order. He believed in balance. He believed in consequences. And most importantly, he believed that power meant nothing if you couldn't control it. He wasn't flashy. Didn't need to be. He moved quietly, spoke softly, and when he made a decision, it was final. People respected him because he respected the community. He kept the peace. He made sure the right people got paid. He made sure the wrong people got handled. And his wife? She was his equal in every way that mattered. Elegant, sharp, beloved by the neighborhood. She ran charity drives, organized community events, made sure the elderly had food and the kids had coats in the winter. She wasn't just arm candy or a trophy. She was a partner, a pillar. So when that Cadillac showed up on Lenox Avenue with blood on the handle and a Klan marker swinging from the mirror, it wasn't just an attack on one woman. It was an attack on Harlem itself. It was a challenge, a declaration. And Harlem? Harlem had a king. And kings don't forgive. Her name was Lorraine Hayes. Though most people in Harlem just called her Mrs. Hayes, and they said it with reverence, not fear, not obligation, respect. She was 32 years old, with a smile that could disarm anyone, and a spine made of steel. She wore her hair pinned up in victory rolls, favored deep burgundy lipstick, and had a way of walking into a room that made everyone sit up a little straighter. Not because she demanded it, but because her presence simply commanded it. Lorraine wasn't born into wealth. She grew up in a cramped apartment in the Bronx, the daughter of a seamstress and a porter. She learned early that survival required more than luck. It required grit, intelligence, and the ability to read people faster than they could read you. By the time she was 20, she was running a small dress shop out of a storefront on 125th Street. By 25, she owned the building. That's where she met him, her future husband. He came in one afternoon looking for a gift for his mother, and Lorraine sold him a scarf and a vision of what partnership could look like. They were married 6 months later. But Lorraine never became just the wife. She carved out her own space, her own influence. She organized food drives during the winter months, making sure no family in Harlem went hungry. She set up a fund to help young men coming back from the war find work and housing. She threw events that brought the community together, not the high society types looking to be seen, but real people who needed a reason to smile. The kids loved her. She'd hand out candy on her way to the market, remember their names, ask about their schoolwork. The elderly adored her. She'd sit with them on their stoops, listen to their stories, make sure they had what they needed. And the women? They looked up to her. She was proof that you could be strong and soft at the same time, that you could demand respect without raising your voice. Her husband's reputation kept certain kinds of trouble away, sure. But Lorraine's reputation kept the heart of Harlem beating. She was the warmth to his cold calculation, the grace to his ruthlessness. Together, they were untouchable, or so everyone thought. The morning of the abduction, Lorraine had been on her way to meet with a church group about setting up a tutoring program for kids who were falling behind in school. She left the house at 6:10 a.m., kissed her husband on the cheek, told him she'd be back by noon. He watched her walk to the car, same as he did every morning. She slid behind the wheel of that black Cadillac, adjusted the mirror, and pulled away from the curb. That was the last time he saw her leave on her own terms. When word reached him 2 hours later about the car on Lenox Avenue, he didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. The white cloth with those 3 letters told him everything. They hadn't just taken his wife, they'd taken the heart of his world. And in doing so, they'd made the biggest mistake of their lives. Because Lorraine wasn't just loved. She was protected. And anyone who touched her had just signed their own death warrant. His name was Marcus Hayes. And if you lived in Harlem in 1947, you knew that name. You knew it the way you knew which streets to avoid after dark, which cops took bribes, and which landlords would throw you out without blinking. You knew it because Marcus Hayes was the man who made things happen, or made them stop. He wasn't tall, maybe 5'9" on a good day, but height didn't matter when you carried yourself the way he did. Shoulders back, eyes sharp, every movement deliberate. He wore tailored suits, always dark, always pressed. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. His hat sat at an angle that said he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Marcus didn't come from money either. He grew up in the same kind of poverty that swallowed most kids whole. His father died when he was 12, a factory accident that the company called unavoidable, and paid his mother $30 to forget about. His mother worked herself to the bone trying to keep the lights on, and Marcus watched her fade a little more each year until she was gone too. He was 16 when he buried her, 17 when he decided he'd never be powerless again. He started small, running numbers, collecting debts, learning who mattered and who didn't. But Marcus was different from the other young men trying to claw their way up. He didn't act on impulse. He didn't start fights he couldn't finish. He watched, he listened, he learned. By the time he was 25, he wasn't just another hustler. He was the one people came to when they needed problems solved. Not with fists, though he had men for that when necessary, but with strategy, with leverage, with the kind of cold, calculated thinking that turned chaos into control. Marcus believed in rules. Not the law didn't protect people like him, but his own code. You didn't steal from your own. You didn't hurt women or children. You kept your word, and if someone broke theirs, you made sure everyone knew what happened next. Consequences had to be clear, consistent. That's how you maintained order, and order was everything to Marcus Hayes. He didn't run Harlem through fear alone. He ran it through respect. He made sure the right people got paid. He kept outside gangs from moving in. He settled disputes before they turned bloody. He funded businesses that kept money circulating in the neighborhood. He wasn't a saint, far from it, but he understood that power without purpose was just noise. People feared him, yes, but they also trusted him, and in a world where trust was a rare commodity that made him untouchable. Until that morning. Marcus was in his office when the call came in. A small room above a barber shop on 135th Street. Nothing fancy, just a desk, a chair, a radio in the corner playing something low and smooth. He was going over numbers when one of his men burst through the door, out of breath, eyes wide. "Boss, it's Mrs. Hayes." Marcus didn't move, didn't blink, just looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. "What about her?" "Her car, on Lenox, door open, blood," and the man hesitated, swallowing hard. "There's a cloth, clan marker." For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. The room was so quiet you could hear the second hand ticking on the clock above the door. Then he stood, buttoned his jacket, and reached for his hat. "Get everyone, now." His voice was calm, steady, but everyone in that room knew what it meant. There was no rage, no shouting, no wild threats, just cold, surgical focus. Because Marcus Hayes didn't lose control, he applied it. He walked out of that office and down the stairs, his men falling in line behind him. By the time he reached the street, word was already spreading. Lorraine Hayes had been taken, and Marcus Hayes was moving. Harlem held its breath, because when Marcus moved, people disappeared. Businesses closed overnight. Problems got solved in ways that left no witnesses. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to make speeches. Everyone knew what was coming. The Klan had crossed a line they didn't even understand existed. They thought they were dealing with just another black man they could intimidate, another community they could terrorize. They were wrong. Marcus Hayes wasn't just any man. He was Harlem's king. And kings don't forgive. All right, pause for just a second. If you're hooked right now, and I know you are, do me a favor and smash that like button. Seriously. It helps more people discover stories like this, stories that deserve to be told, stories that remind us what happens when people push too far. And real quick, I'm curious, what's the weather like where you are right now? Sunny? Rainy? Snowing? Are you bundled up or sweating? Drop it in the comments. I love hearing from you all, and it helps me know who's out there watching. Also, if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Trust me, we've got more coming that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. All right, back to the story. Because what happened next wasn't loud. It wasn't messy. It was surgical, calculated. The kind of response that makes you realize some people don't need to scream to be terrifying. Let me show you how a king handles betrayal. They called themselves the Brotherhood of the Southern Cross. Pretentious name for a group of cowards, but that's what they went with. 8 men total, all white, all bitter, all convinced that the world owed them something it wasn't delivering. Most of them had regular jobs. One worked at a printing shop in Midtown. Another drove a delivery truck. There was a mechanic, a dock worker, a guy who sold insurance door to door. During the day, they blended in, kept their heads down, smiled at customers, cashed their paychecks. But at night, they met in the basement of an abandoned textile factory on the edge of the Bronx, just far enough from Harlem to feel safe. They'd sit around a table with a bottle of cheap whiskey, smoking cigarettes and nursing grudges that had been festering since childhood. They hated what Harlem represented, hated the music, the culture, the confidence, hated that black folks were building something they couldn't tear down with laws or intimidation anymore. The war had changed things. Men who'd fought overseas came back different, less willing to bow, less willing to accept the old rules, and that terrified them. So they decided to remind Harlem who was really in charge. Their leader was a man named Douglas Calloway, mid-40s, thinning hair, soft hands. He didn't attend the meetings in person, too risky, he said, but he funded everything, paid for the materials, covered the costs, gave the orders from a distance, always through a middleman, always careful to keep his name out of it. Calloway owned a small investment firm in Lower Manhattan, made decent money, lived in a brownstone in Brooklyn with his wife and 2 kids. On paper, he was respectable, a businessman, a family man, someone you'd never suspect. But underneath that polished exterior was a man who believed the world had been better before the war, before integration started creeping in, before people like Marcus Hayes started acting like they owned the streets. Calloway didn't get his hands dirty. He didn't need to. He had men for that. Men who were angry enough, desperate enough, or stupid enough to do what he asked without questioning it. The plan had been his idea. Take someone close to Hayes, someone visible, someone whose disappearance would send a message that couldn't be ignored. Make it public, make it symbolic. Remind Harlem that no matter how much power they thought they had, there were still forces bigger and older that could reach in and take whatever they wanted. Lorraine Hayes was the perfect target. They'd been watching her for weeks, learned her routine, knew she left early on Tuesday mornings for her church meetings, knew she drove alone, knew the route she took. On the morning of the abduction, 3 of them waited in a stolen panel truck 2 blocks from her house. When she turned onto Lenox Avenue, they boxed her in, forced her to the curb. One man smashed the window. Another dragged her out before she could scream. They shoved her into the back of the truck, tied her hands, covered her mouth. The whole thing took less than 90 seconds. They left the Cadillac running, left her purse on the seat, and they tied that white cloth to the mirror because they wanted everyone to know. This wasn't random. This was a statement. They drove her to a warehouse in Yonkers, locked her in a back room with a single chair, a bucket, and no windows. Then they waited. Calloway's instructions had been clear. Hold her for 3 days. Let the fear spread. Let Hayes squirm. Then, if he didn't back down, if he didn't show the proper respect, they'd make an example of her that Harlem would never forget. But here's the thing about men like Calloway and his so-called brotherhood. They'd spent so long hiding behind sheets and shadows that they'd forgotten what real power looked like. They thought intimidation was strength. They thought fear was control. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Because Marcus Hayes didn't operate on fear. He operated on certainty. And the moment Lorraine was taken, the clock started ticking. Not for him, for them. Marcus didn't make a scene, didn't call a meeting, didn't gather his men in some dramatic show of force. That's not how he worked. He made 3 phone calls. That's it. 3 calls, each one less than a minute long, and within the hour, every set of eyes in Harlem was looking, watching, listening. Because that's what power really looks like. It's not loud. It's not flashy. It's the ability to move an entire community with a whisper. The first call went to a man named Jerome, who ran a network of shoeshine boys and newspaper vendors scattered across every corner in Harlem. Kids who saw everything and remembered more than people gave them credit for. Jerome put the word out. Anyone who'd seen anything unusual that morning, any unfamiliar cars, any white men lingering where they didn't belong, there was money in it. Good money. The second call went to a woman named Claudette, who owned a beauty salon on 125th Street. That salon wasn't just a place to get your hair done. It was a hub. Women talked there, shared gossip, passed along information they'd heard from husbands, brothers, boyfriends. Claudette made sure every woman who walked through her door that day knew what had happened and what to listen for. The third call went to a man named Raymond, who worked the docks and had connections with union guys, truck drivers, and warehouse workers all over the city. If something moved in or out of New York, Raymond's people saw it, and now they were watching for anything connected to the clan. Marcus didn't need the police. The police wouldn't help, even if he asked. This was his city, his network, his rules. By noon, the first pieces started coming in. A shoeshine boy on Lenox Avenue remembered a panel truck idling near the corner around 6 that morning. Dark green, no company logo. 2 white men inside, both wearing caps pulled low. The boy didn't think much of it at the time, but he remembered the license plate, wrote it down on a scrap of paper, because Jerome had taught him to notice things like that. A woman getting her hair done at Claudette's mentioned that her cousin worked at a diner in the Bronx. Said a group of white men had been meeting there late at night for the past few weeks, always in the back booth. Always paid in cash. One of them had a tattoo on his forearm, some kind of cross with a circle around it. A dock worker told Raymond he'd seen that same green panel truck parked near an old textile factory a few nights back. Said it looked abandoned, but there were fresh tire tracks in the dirt outside. Each piece of information was small, insignificant on its own, but Marcus had a gift for seeing patterns where others saw noise. He spread a map across his desk and started marking locations. The diner, the factory, the route Lorraine would have taken that morning. Everything pointed north, toward the Bronx, toward Yonkers. Marcus sent men to the diner first, not to start trouble, just to watch. See who came and went, get descriptions, license plates, names if possible. Within 2 days, they had 3 names. Within 3 days, they had addresses. But Marcus didn't move yet. He wanted all of them, every single person involved. Because if you cut off one head and leave the others, they scatter, they hide, they come back later. No, this had to be complete. So he kept pulling threads, kept gathering information. His men followed the ones they'd identified, watched their routines, saw where they worked, where they lived, who they talked to, and that's when they found the connection to Calloway. One of the men, the mechanic, had been seen leaving Calloway's office in Lower Manhattan. Twice. Always after hours. Always through the side entrance. Marcus had heard of Calloway before. Knew he had money. Knew he had opinions about the way things should be. But he'd never been a direct threat. Just another racist with a checkbook. Not anymore. Marcus didn't rush. Didn't let anger cloud his judgment. He waited. Watched. Let his people do their work. Let the net tighten. Harlem kept moving. Shops stayed open. Kids went to school. Music still played in the clubs at night. But underneath it all, there was a current. A tension. Everyone knew something was happening. They didn't talk about it openly, but they felt it. The neighborhood had closed ranks. No one spoke to outsiders. No one cooperated with cops who came sniffing around asking questions. Harlem took care of its own. And right now, Harlem was hunting. 7 days, that's all it took. 7 days for Marcus Hayes to find every man involved. 7 days to map out their lives, their routines, their weaknesses. And on the 7th night, he made his move. All right, hold up. Before we get to what happens next, I need to know, what do you think goes down? Do they find Lorraine in time? Does Marcus get all of them, or does someone slip through? Drop your predictions in the comments right now. I'm serious. I want to hear what you think happens. And if you're feeling this story, hit that share button. Send it to someone who loves true crime. Someone who appreciates stories about justice, power, and what happens when people underestimate the wrong ones. Also, quick shout out to everyone who's been commenting. I see you. I read every single one. Whether you're watching from Texas, Nigeria, London, or anywhere else, thank you for being here. Now, let's get into it. Because what happens next is the moment everything comes together. The moment Marcus Hayes reminds the world why you don't touch what belongs to him. This is where it gets intense. Day 4. That's when the cracks started showing. The men in the Brotherhood were getting nervous. They'd expected chaos by now. Expected Marcus Hayes to come storming through Harlem, making threats, shaking people down, acting reckless. That's what they thought men like him did, lost control, made mistakes, gave the cops a reason to step in. But there was nothing. No public outbursts, no raids, no violence spilling into the streets, just silence. And that silence was more terrifying than any threat could have been. The mechanic, a guy named Pete Drennan, started drinking heavier than usual. He'd show up to work late, hands shaking, eyes darting toward every car that slowed down near the garage. His boss asked if he was all right. Pete said he was fine, but he wasn't fine. He felt it, the weight of being watched. The delivery driver, Tommy Farrell, stopped going to his usual bar, started taking different routes home, kept checking his rearview mirror like something was following him. His wife asked what was wrong. He snapped at her, told her to mind her business. The dock worker, a man named Carl Bittner, tried to skip town, packed a bag, told his roommate he was visiting family upstate. But when he got to the bus station, he saw a black man in a sharp suit standing near the ticket counter. Just standing there, watching. Carl turned around and went home, didn't leave his apartment for 2 days. They were unraveling, and they didn't even know how much Marcus already knew. Meanwhile, Marcus's people were everywhere. A waiter at the diner where the Brotherhood met started paying closer attention to conversations. A janitor at the textile factory noticed fresh cigarette butts near the loading dock and pocketed a few. A woman who cleaned offices in Lower Manhattan saw Calloway's name on a folder left open on a desk next to a handwritten note with an address in Yonkers. Every piece mattered. Every detail added up. Marcus spread it all out in front of him like a puzzle. He didn't need every piece to see the picture. He just needed enough. And by day 5, he had enough. The warehouse in Yonkers. That's where they were keeping her. An old bottling plant that had been shut down since before the war. Isolated, surrounded by empty lots and chain-link fence. Perfect place to hide someone if you didn't think anyone would come looking. But Marcus had the address. He had the layout. He had the schedule of who was watching her and when they rotated shifts. He also had something else. Calloway's name. That changed everything. Because the men who'd grabbed Lorraine? They were foot soldiers. Disposable. Calloway was the one pulling the strings. The one who thought his money and his distance made him untouchable. The one who believed he could fund terror and walk away clean. Marcus made a decision. He'd get Lorraine first, then he'd deal with Calloway. On the night of day 6, Marcus gathered his core team. 5 men, all of them loyal, all of them disciplined. No hotheads, no one looking for glory, just professionals who understood the job. He laid out the plan in his office. No wasted words, no dramatic speeches. 2 men are watching her. They switch at midnight. We go in at 11:30. Quiet. No guns unless absolutely necessary. We get her out. We handle them. Then we disappear. One of his men asked the question everyone was thinking. What about the others? Marcus didn't hesitate. We'll get to them. That was it. That was the whole plan. Simple, clean, effective. Because Marcus didn't believe in overcomplicated schemes. He believed in knowing your enemy better than they knew themselves, and by now, he knew everything. He knew Pete Drennan lived alone in a basement apartment in the Bronx. Knew Tommy Farrell had a girlfriend in Queens he visited every Thursday. Knew Carl Bittner owed money to half the bars in his neighborhood. And he knew Douglas Calloway thought he was safe in his Brooklyn brownstone with his wife and kids and his respectable reputation. They were all wrong. The Brotherhood had made their move thinking they were untouchable, thinking they could strike and fade back into the shadows, thinking Marcus Hayes was just another man they could intimidate. But Marcus wasn't just another man. He was a tactician, a strategist, someone who understood that real power wasn't about making noise, it was about making examples, and the example he was about to make would echo through every corner of New York. On the night of day 7, Marcus and his men loaded into 2 cars. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. They drove north through the city, past the lights of Harlem, past the Bronx, into the industrial wasteland of Yonkers. The bottling plant loomed ahead in the darkness. No lights, no movement, just the faint glow of a cigarette near the side entrance where one of the guards was standing. Marcus checked his watch. 11:28 p.m. He looked at his men, nodded once, and then they moved. They moved like shadows. No headlights, no engine noise. The cars rolled to a stop 2 blocks away from the bottling plant, tucked behind a row of rusted shipping containers. Marcus and his men stepped out into the cold night air, their breath visible in the dim light. No one spoke. Hand signals only. Two men peeled off to circle around the back of the building. Two more positioned themselves near the front entrance. Marcus and his right-hand man, a quiet giant named Lewis, headed straight for the side door where the guard was smoking. The man didn't even see them coming. Lewis moved fast for someone his size. One hand clamped over the guard's mouth, the other arm locked around his throat. The cigarette fell to the ground, still burning. 10 seconds later, the man went limp. Lewis lowered him to the pavement, checked his pulse, then dragged him into the shadows. Marcus stepped over the cigarette and pushed the door open. Inside, the plant was a graveyard of machinery. Conveyor belts frozen in place, broken bottles scattered across the floor. The smell of rust and stale water hung in the air. A single bulb flickered somewhere deeper in the building, casting long, jittering shadows across the walls. Marcus moved forward, his footsteps silent on the concrete. Lewis followed close behind. They found the second guard in what used to be the foreman's office. He was leaning back in a chair, feet propped up on a desk, half asleep with a magazine in his lap. A revolver sat on the desk next to a half-empty bottle of beer. Marcus didn't give him a chance to react. He crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbed the revolver, and pressed the barrel against the man's temple before he could even open his mouth. "Where is she?" The man's eyes went wide. He stammered, tried to form words, but nothing came out. Marcus cocked the hammer. "I won't ask twice. Back room, down the hall, last door on the left." Marcus nodded to Lewis, who grabbed the man by the collar and yanked him out of the chair. They zip-tied his hands behind his back, shoved a rag in his mouth, and left him on the floor. Then they moved. Down the hallway. Past offices with shattered windows and doors hanging off their hinges. The flickering light grew brighter as they approached the last door. Marcus stopped, listened. Nothing. He tested the handle. Locked. Lewis didn't wait. He stepped back and kicked the door just below the handle. The frame splintered. The door swung open, and there she was. Lorraine, sitting in a wooden chair in the center of the room, hands tied behind her back, a strip of cloth tied around her mouth. Her dress was torn. Her hair had come loose from its pins. There was a bruise on her cheek and dried blood at the corner of her lip. But her eyes were sharp, defiant, unbroken. When she saw Marcus, something shifted in her expression. Not relief, not tears, just a flicker of recognition, a silent acknowledgement. "Took you long enough." Marcus crossed the room and knelt in front of her. He pulled a knife from his coat and cut the ropes, binding her wrists, then gently removed the gag from her mouth. "You all right?" His voice was low, steady. Lorraine nodded, rubbing her wrists where the ropes had bitten into her skin. "I knew you'd come. Always." He helped her to her feet. She swayed slightly, and he steadied her. Lewis appeared in the doorway, gave a quick nod. The building was clear. "Can you walk?" Marcus asked. "I can run if I have to." Marcus almost smiled. "Almost. Let's go." They moved quickly back through the plant. Lorraine, between Marcus and Lewis, flanked and protected. The 2 guards were still where they'd left them, one outside, one in the office, neither one moving. When they reached the cars, Marcus opened the back door and helped Lorraine inside. He took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. "Get her home," he told the driver. "Stay with her. Don't leave her side." The driver nodded and pulled away into the night. Marcus watched the taillights disappear, then turned to the men who remained. "Now we finish this." Over the next 72 hours, the Brotherhood of the Southern Cross ceased to exist. Pete Drennan was found unconscious in an alley behind his apartment building. Broken nose, cracked ribs, no memory of who'd done it. He left New York 2 days later and never came back. Tommy Farrell's delivery truck was run off the road on a stretch of highway outside the city. He survived, barely. Spent 3 weeks in the hospital. When he got out, he moved to Pennsylvania and changed his name. Carl Bittner tried to run again. Made it as far as New Jersey before his car broke down on a back road. He was found the next morning, beaten and tied to a fence post with a note pinned to his chest. "Stay out of Harlem." The others met similar fates. None of them died. Marcus wasn't interested in making martyrs, but every single one of them was reminded, in ways they'd never forget, that there were consequences for crossing certain lines. And then there was Douglas Calloway. Marcus didn't go after him right away. He waited. Let Calloway hear what had happened to his men. Let the fear settle in. Let him realize that his money, his distance, his carefully constructed respectability meant nothing. 3 weeks after Lorraine came home, Calloway's investment firm went under. Clients pulled out overnight. Partners disappeared. Bank accounts froze. His reputation crumbled in a matter of days. No one could prove Marcus had anything to do with it. But everyone knew. Calloway lost everything. His business, his home, his standing in the community. He moved out of New York with his family, disgraced and broken. And Marcus? Marcus never said a word about it. Didn't need to. The message had been sent. The message had been received. Harlem had spoken. And the whole city heard it. Lorraine came home on a Thursday evening. The block was quiet when the car pulled up. No crowds, no celebration. That wasn't Marcus's style, and it wasn't what Lorraine needed. She'd been through enough. The last thing she wanted was to be paraded around like some kind of trophy. But word spread anyway. It always did. By Friday morning, every person in Harlem knew she was back, safe, whole, and the people responsible had been dealt with. No one asked for details. No one needed to. The women at Claudette's salon smiled a little wider that day. The shoeshine boys on the corner stood a little taller. The men at the barber shop nodded to each other with a quiet understanding. Harlem had been tested. And Harlem had answered. Lorraine didn't leave the house for a week. Not because she was afraid fear wasn't in her nature, but because she needed time. Time to process. Time to heal. Time to remember that she was more than what had been done to her. Marcus stayed close. He canceled meetings, turned away visitors, sat with her in the evenings while she sipped tea and stared out the window at the street below. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. After years of marriage, some things didn't require words. But one night, as they sat in the dim glow of the living room lamp, Lorraine finally spoke. They thought taking me would break you. Marcus looked at her, waited. They didn't understand. She continued, her voice steady. That you and I? We're not separate. We're the same thing. You can't break one without breaking the other. Marcus reached over and took her hand. They'll never make that mistake again. And they wouldn't, because the story of what happened spread far beyond Harlem. It reached Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx. It reached the docks, the union halls, the back rooms where men made deals and settled scores. Everyone heard the same thing. Marcus Hayes's wife had been taken, and Marcus Hayes had dismantled an entire organization in response. Quietly, methodically, completely. It wasn't just a rescue. It was a demonstration. A reminder that some people operated on a different level. That power wasn't about who shouted the loudest or who had the most guns. It was about discipline, strategy, the ability to move an entire city without firing a single shot. Marcus's reputation, already formidable, became something else entirely. Untouchable didn't even begin to describe it. But more than that, Harlem itself felt different. There was a pride in the air, a sense of unity that hadn't been there before. The community had closed ranks when it mattered most. They'd protected their own. They'd proven that no outside force, no matter how old, no matter how hateful, could reach into their neighborhood and take what they wanted without consequence. The Klan had tried to send a message. Instead, they'd received one. Harlem wasn't afraid. Harlem wasn't weak. And Harlem had a king who would burn the world down before he let anyone harm what was his. In the months that followed, things returned to normal. Lorraine went back to her charity work. Marcus went back to running his operations. The jazz clubs kept playing. The streets kept moving. But everyone remembered. The kids who'd helped gather information. The women who'd passed along whispers. The men who'd tracked down leads. They all remembered what it felt like to be part of something bigger than themselves. And the people who might have thought about testing Harlem again? They remembered too. Because the story of Lorraine Hayes and the reckoning that followed became legend. The kind of story that got told in barbershops and on street corners. The kind of story that reminded people what happened when you underestimated the wrong ones. Some lines, once crossed, can never be walked back. The Klan learned that the hard way. So what do we take away from a story like this? It's easy to look at what happened and see it as just another tale of revenge. Another crime story with a beginning, middle, and end. But it's deeper than that. This story is about power. Real power. Not the kind that comes from violence or intimidation, but the kind that comes from discipline, strategy, and understanding exactly who you are and what you're capable of. Marcus Hayes didn't win because he was the loudest or the most brutal. He won because he was patient, because he understood that true strength isn't reactive, it's calculated. He didn't let emotion cloud his judgment. He didn't make reckless moves. He waited. He watched. He gathered every piece of information he needed, and then he acted with precision. That's the difference between chaos and control. But this story is also about community, about what happens when people come together for a common cause. Harlem didn't just sit back and wait for Marcus to handle everything. The shoeshine boys, the salon owners, the dock workers, they all played a part. They all contributed, because they understood that an attack on one of them was an attack on all of them. That's the power of unity. That's what happens when a community refuses to be divided. And then there's the lesson about underestimation. The Klan looked at Harlem and saw what they wanted to see: a neighborhood they could intimidate, a man they could break, a woman they could take without consequence. They saw black folks and assumed weakness, assumed fear, assumed submission. They were wrong on every count, because the biggest mistake you can make is underestimating someone based on who you think they are instead of who they actually are. The Klan thought they were dealing with people who had no power, no resources, no ability to fight back. What they didn't realize was that they were stepping into a world with its own rules, its own structure, and its own form of justice. This story happened in 1947, but the lessons are timeless. Power isn't about how much noise you make, it's about how effectively you move. Community isn't just a word, it's a force. And respect? Respect is earned through action, not demanded through fear. The Brotherhood of the Southern Cross thought they could send a message. Instead, they became the message. A warning to anyone who thought Harlem could be pushed around. A reminder that some people, some communities, some bonds are unbreakable. Marcus and Lorraine Hayes didn't just survive what happened to them. They turned it into a statement, a line drawn in the sand that said, "This far and no further." And that line held. Because some lines, once crossed, can never be walked back. And that's the story. If this moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you of something important, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. We're building something here. A community of people who care about real stories, stories that matter, stories that don't get told enough. Turn on those notifications so you never miss an upload. Trust me, we've got more coming that'll keep you hooked. And drop a comment below. I want to know what's one takeaway you're leaving with today. What hit you the hardest? Was it Marcus's discipline? Lorraine's strength? The way the community came together? Let me know. I read every single comment, and I love hearing your thoughts. If you know someone who'd appreciate this story, share it with them. Send it to your group chat. Post it on your timeline. Stories like this deserve to be heard. Before you go, remember this. Power isn't about how loud you are. It's about how smart you move. Community isn't just a word, it's a lifeline. And respect? Respect is earned, not given. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. And thanks for caring about stories that remind us what happens when people push too far. Stay safe out there. Keep your head up. And remember, some debts always get paid. I'll see you in the next one.